The Pennhurst Asylum, a necessary closure or a flawed transition. In the overgrown wooded town of Spring City, Pennsylvania, lies the harrowing remains of what once was the Pennhurst Asylum, now lingering as a powerful but eerie reminder of its once questionable operation. During its operation from 1908 to 1987, it was home at a point to over 1,000 people who experienced intellectual and developmental disabilities, and has become a stark symbol of the mistreatment of these marginalized groups. Upon its closure after years of public scrutiny, its righteous fall was celebrated amidst the ongoing battle for civil rights. However, the legacy of the Pennhurst Asylum did not end after closing, and neither did the legal and social failures that allowed it to operate in the first place. The true tragedy is that even with the closure, what replaced this faulty system did not even remotely live up to their promise of progression. The eventual fall of the asylum was critical for confronting institutional abuse and assisting with the development of disability rights. But the greater deinstitutionalization movement that soon followed, that promised a brighter future was incapable of delivering the proper support systems, ultimately just shifting areas of neglect. In 1908, Pennhurst opened as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Considering this now very concerning title, the institution was grounded from its inception in eugenic ideology. In 1913, a report provided to the Pennsylvania legislature noted that people residing in the asylum were, quote, unfit for citizenship and could be a menace to the peace, end quote. It was this very language that placated the lack of value that disabled people had in social settings. It became increasingly clear that around the 1950s and 60s, 40 years into operation, that Pennhurst was becoming increasingly overcrowded and insanely underfunded. Reports from staff as well as legal hearings described the awful living conditions the residents were subjected to, including malnourishment, lack of proper clothing, confines in dirty rooms, and physical restraints placed on those in wheelchairs. There was little to no medical operations for the sickly, and education was next to non-existent. Simply put, it was hell on earth, and the residents were often not physically or mentally capable of voicing these concerns. It wasn't until 1968 when NBC released a television show named Suffer the Little Children, where graphic footage of what was truly happening inside Pennhurst was released. It revealed children in soiled clothing, cries of distress, and rocking themselves in dark, dirty rooms in order to maintain some level of sanity. A reporter on this case, Bill Baldini, stated Pennhurst to be, quote, a warehouse for the people society wanted to forget, end quote. Needless to say, public backlash was immediate and aggressive. Following this, a class action lawsuit, Halderman versus Pennhurst State School and Hospital, was filed in 1974 on behalf of Terry Lee Halderman, who was a former resident of the asylum. During her institutionalization, she experienced severe physical abuse. It was ultimately ruled that Pennhurst had clearly been in violation of multiple, if not all, residents' constitutional rights, namely one's right to be free from immediate harm and to receive rehabilitation services in, quote, the least restrictive environment, end quote. In 1977, it was declared by U.S. District Judge Raymond Broderick that any continuation of institutionalization at Pennhurst was in clear violation of the 14th Amendment, this being an, quote, equal protection of the laws, end quote. This was ultimately a decision that sent shockwaves through the pre-existing disability services system. The unusually cruel and evil Pennhurst Asylum had, in that moment, become a symbol of not only cruelty, but also the inherent danger of institutionalization. It soon after became a federal policy to close similar large-scale institutions. In theory, deinstitutionalization was a victory for the civil rights movement. The idea was designed to correct systematic abuse for those institutionalized by placing people with disabilities in community environments to receive personalized support and have overall greater autonomy. However, the manner in which this change was conducted was quite flawed from the start. There simply was not enough infrastructure available nationwide to support these individuals that had come from institutions such as Pennhurst. Homes, hospitals, and inpatient facilities were closed with no reinvestment in proper programs, especially under a strong pressure to cut costs. The National Council on Disability in 2012 reported on this idea, stating, quote, Deinstitutionalization succeeded in discharging people from institutions, but failed to provide the necessary support in the community, end quote. The timing in which deinstitutionalization occurred was unfortunately a coincidence with other major social service cuts, including the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981. This totally slashed mental health programs, and mental health centers lost 30% of funding in 1 year, leaving many with no stable care or housing access. Overall, the consequences were severe and unprecedented. There were thousands of residents who found themselves in places with little regulation and were overall substandard. There was also a significant population who became homeless and entered the criminal justice system. This introduced a new, interesting phenomenon labeled as trans-institutionalization, where many prisons, even today, see significant numbers of inmates also having mental disabilities. The article Prisons Are the New Asylums, published in 2018, considers this idea. It explains how many communities, jails, and even emergency rooms have become the new free housing considering deinstitutionalization has failed because society has entirely refused to replace these institutions with meaningful alternatives. Despite the multitude of failures, there are some advocates against blaming deinstitutionalization entirely. This argument is based on the lack of commitment to follow through with promises. Maybe the solution isn't reinstitutionalization, but rather better, more robust community services built for disabled people. Pennhurst, for example, wasn't just a logistically flawed institution, it lacked morals entirely. The clear segregation of the mentally disabled was an obvious reflection of the values, or lack thereof. There's a powerful phrase often used within the disability community: nothing about us without us. This calls for a self-determination standpoint, free of power imbalance and ultimate dependence. For many, this means living in adapted homes instead of controlled facilities. The Pennhurst longitudinal study published in 1985 further suggests that appropriate support in community settings can lead to better outcomes. The study conducted by Temple University following the closure of Pennhurst found that former residents of the asylum did better socially and mentally when placed in smaller community homes. But the issue still remains. There were many people who never received this support. Deinstitutionalization might have been the moral answer, but the future promise was careless and underfunded. Today, what remains of the Pennhurst Asylum has been converted into a haunted attraction for the fall season and holidays, where visitors can buy tickets to see actors perform as inmates. For the disability community, it's tasteless and totally commodifies suffering. It's arguable that this facility should instead be turned into a historical landmark or education center rather than a quote, haunted asylum. But this isn't the core issue. It's how we still haven't moved past institutions. Group homes with low funding and little oversight still exist today, and Medicaid service waiting lists can take years and years. Pennhurst wasn't just evil in and of itself, but also a reflection on how disability was viewed as a social negative. Systematic neglect still exists to this day, just in a different form than 100 years ago. The question remains on how disability community should be cared for, not just in theory, but also in true humane practice.